Miriam Carter stepped into the lobby of a small branch of Carter Financial, the bank she had founded years ago. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting elongated shadows on the polished wooden floors. As the automatic doors slid open, a soft whoosh filled the air, and her loafers tapped lightly against the ground. She adjusted her casual blazer over her shoulders, here for nothing grand, no high-stakes meetings, no urgent matters, just a simple withdrawal from her personal account, an everyday transaction like any other. Carter Financial was more than just a bank to her. It was the institution she had built from the ground up. She had created it on the foundation of fairness and accessibility, believing that exceptional service should be available to all. Through the years, she had guided it through obstacles and triumphs, ensuring customers were always treated with dignity. This very branch was a symbol of that vision. She had personally selected its location, overseen its launch, and even taken part in the ribbon-cutting ceremony. But today, there was no tailored suit or high heels. She hadn't come to project authority. She was here simply as a customer. Wearing a blazer and loafers, she approached the counter with a composed and neutral expression. This wasn't about status. It was about ensuring that the institution she had built was as fair as it claimed to be. The young teller at the counter barely acknowledged her, offering only a fleeting glance before turning back to the computer screen. Miriam cleared her throat slightly, hoping to prompt some attention. "Hi, I'd like to make a withdrawal," she said, her tone steady and calm. The teller, Olivia Brooks, didn't meet her gaze, but instead slid a clipboard across the counter. "Please fill this out," she instructed, her eyes fixed on the screen. The form was simple: name, account number, withdrawal amount. Miriam quickly filled it out, writing down $5,000 and handed it back. It wasn't a massive amount, but it was enough to require verification. As Olivia reviewed the slip, Miriam noticed a subtle shift in her demeanor. Olivia's gaze flicked between the form, her ID, and the screen. A hesitation crept in, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there moments before. "Could you hold on a moment?" Olivia asked, her voice now hesitant. She grabbed Miriam's ID and disappeared through a frosted glass door leading to the back office. Miriam remained still, her fingers tapping lightly against the counter's smooth wooden surface. She had expected professionalism, efficiency, basic courtesy, but something about this interaction felt different. A few moments later, Olivia returned, but she wasn't alone. James Holloway, the branch manager, followed close behind. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter," he greeted her with a practiced smile. Though there was an edge to his tone, he barely glanced at her before focusing on the form in front of him. "I understand you're making a withdrawal." Miriam nodded. "Yes, $5,000 from my personal account." James hesitated before responding. "May I see your ID again?" A flicker of irritation passed through Miriam. "I already gave it to Olivia," she replied, her voice firm but composed. James ignored her remark, holding her ID up to the light as though searching for imperfections, despite her long history with Carter Financial. After a brief pause, he asked, "What do you do for work, Miss Carter?" Miriam's jaw tensed. "I run a bank," she answered, her tone sharpening slightly. James gave a slow nod, then exchanged a glance with Olivia before posing another question. "Is this a personal or business account?" Miriam's patience was wearing thin. "It's right there on the form," she said icily. James flipped her ID in his hands, avoiding direct eye contact. This wasn't about standard procedure. It wasn't about policy. It was about something else, Something unspoken. His fingers lingered over her identification as if he expected it to reveal a discrepancy. The steady hum of the lobby had quieted, replaced by an air of unease. Though frustration burned beneath the surface, Miriam refused to show it. Olivia stood stiffly beside James, her eyes darting between them but remaining silent. The tension was undeniable, growing thicker with each passing second. Miriam had been in situations like this before, times when her authority had been questioned, her legitimacy doubted, but never here, not in her own bank. James studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "Miss Carter, I'll need to ask you a few more questions before processing your transaction." Miriam forced herself to remain composed, but the next question was even more absurd. "Just to clarify, is this your first time banking with us?" Her stomach tightened. This wasn't just about verification. It was about something else entirely. "I've banked here since the day this branch opened," Miriam said, her voice unwavering. James didn't reply immediately. His eyes flickered toward Olivia before turning back to Miriam, as though considering his next move carefully. He was stalling, searching for justification. "And you're withdrawing $5,000? He repeated slowly, as if the sum itself needed further explanation. "Can you remind me what you do for a living, Miss Carter?" Miriam's patience snapped. What was the purpose of this? Did he not hear her the first time? Had she not already stated that she was in finance? That she was, in fact, the CEO of Carter Financial? "I run a bank," she repeated, her frustration now unmistakable. "The very bank you work for." James hesitated again, before pressing further, his voice more pointed this time. "And what kind of bank is that?" Miriam's grip on the counter tightened. Taking a slow breath, she forced herself to maintain her composure. This was no longer a routine inquiry. It was an interrogation, laced with condescension. "I own this bank," she said, her voice firm and unyielding. "I founded Carter Financial." A heavy silence settled between them as James processed her words. The atmosphere grew dense, and Miriam could feel the shift in his demeanor. He wasn't merely asking questions anymore. He was scrutinizing her, looking for an excuse to decline her request. After what felt like an endless pause, he glanced at the withdrawal slip, then back at her, his face betraying nothing. "I see," he murmured, though Miriam could tell he hadn't truly registered what she had said. "Is this a personal or business account?" Miriam's patience was stretched thin. "It's a personal account," she said, her voice tight with restraint. "It's right there on the form. What exactly is the issue?" Olivia, standing just behind James, shifted uneasily, but he remained unfazed. His fingers traced the details on the slip as though searching for an error. But Miriam knew better. He wasn't checking for mistakes. He was waiting for her to justify her presence. Miriam remained motionless, observing him. She was done playing this game. She refused to be reduced to just another customer, especially not in the institution she had built. She had entered expecting a straightforward transaction, assuming she would be treated like anyone else. But this had become a test, one that made her increasingly aware of how far James was willing to push her. He flicked his gaze between the form and Miriam before locking eyes with her again. The tension was palpable, a silent battle unfolding. Miriam stood firm, arms loosely crossed over her chest, unwilling to yield. "So you're withdrawing $5,000 from your personal account?" James reiterated, his voice slow and measured as he studied her face, as if waiting for her to waver. "Is that correct?" Miriam held his gaze. "Yes. You have the form. All the details are correct. What's the holdup?" James didn't respond immediately. Instead, he flipped the slip over, scrutinizing it for an invisible flaw. But there was none. No error, no reason for this delay. Miriam felt frustration simmering beneath her composed exterior, but she refused to let it surface. At last, James exhaled slightly and looked back up. "Before we proceed with your withdrawal, I'll need you to verify some additional information." Miriam blinked, her confusion evident. "Additional information? I've already provided my ID, the form, my account number. What else do you need?" James hesitated for a fraction of a second, then posed a question that sent irritation flashing through her. "Can you confirm the amount of your last deposit into this account?" Miriam's jaw clenched. That wasn't standard procedure. She knew this wasn't a common requirement, even for large withdrawals. A higher amount might justify additional verification, but not $5,000. Not for a customer with a history as long-standing as hers. "I don't have that figure memorized," she admitted, keeping her voice even. "But you have access to my account details. You can check it just as you would for any other client." James barely reacted. He simply nodded, as if absorbing her response, though his expression remained calculating, as though he were still searching for a reason to challenge her claim to her own money. A thick silence lingered. "We take security very seriously," James finally stated, his tone rehearsed, almost mechanical. "This is merely a precaution." Miriam's grip on the counter tightened. "A precaution?" she echoed, disbelief creeping into her voice. "What exactly are you implying, James?" He offered no direct answer. Instead, he reached across the desk and picked up a clipboard. "It's just our policy. We need to ensure you're the account holder before authorizing the withdrawal." Miriam's mind raced. She had walked through these doors for years. She had personally inaugurated this branch. Her identity and authority were unquestionable, so why was she being forced to validate what should have already been accepted? Why was she being subjected to such unnecessary scrutiny? "So my ID, account number, and banking history aren't sufficient proof?" she challenged, her voice sharpening. "You're making me prove my right to access my own funds?" James remained unmoved. "It's standard procedure," he said flatly, his detachment more evident than before. Miriam's eyes narrowed. She had exercised patience, but this had crossed a line. She was being treated like a suspect, and she refused to tolerate it, especially not in her own bank. "Unbelievable," she muttered, her voice edged with controlled anger. "This isn't about security. This is something else entirely." James shifted uneasily, but didn't relent. With exaggerated composure, he placed the clipboard in front of her, sliding it across the counter with calculated politeness. "If you'd like, you can complete the form again," he offered, his voice as smooth as ever. "It's simply part of the process." Miriam didn't move. She didn't reach for the clipboard. Instead, she stood her ground, staring at him, knowing this wouldn't end until someone acknowledged the real issue at hand. Her heart pounded in her chest, her patience all but depleted. The reality of the situation crashed down on her with unsettling clarity. This wasn't about protocol. It never had been. This wasn't about policy. It was about something far deeper, something unrelated to her account. Standing firm, Miriam locked eyes with James, her frustration simmering beneath the surface. She refused to fill out another form. She wasn't going to entertain the charade, not here, not in the bank she built. "James," she said, her voice now cold and precise. "This is absurd. I've been with this bank since its very beginning. I helped establish this branch, and now you're making me prove that I belong here." James's face remained impassive, but Miriam caught the subtle change in his posture. For the first time, he appeared unsettled. Perhaps he was starting to grasp that this was no simple miscommunication. Perhaps he was realizing who he was up against. "You might want to take another look," Miriam said, her tone steady and firm, "because I am not just any customer." James remained silent, frozen as Miriam took a measured breath, ready to escalate. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Without breaking eye contact, she pressed record. The atmosphere in the lobby shifted. Customers sensed something unfolding, but weren't quite sure what. "You are denying me access to my own account," Miriam said, her voice unwavering, "even though I have provided government-issued identification, while others here aren't subjected to this extra scrutiny." James's complexion paled slightly, yet he remained speechless. He seemed caught off guard, uncertain of how to navigate this situation now that Miriam had taken charge. She adjusted the camera slightly, turning it toward the security guard who had been standing idly by. "And you," she said evenly, "why exactly were you summoned?" The guard hesitated, glancing at James before returning his gaze to Miriam. He hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. Miriam didn't allow him to evade. "Answer me. Why are you here?" The guard shifted, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm just here to make sure everything stays under control," he finally said, his voice careful, yet uncertain. "To make sure everything stays under control?" Miriam echoed, disbelief woven into her words. "Or are you here to intimidate me, to put me in my place?" James fidgeted, his gaze darting between Miriam and the guard, clearly floundering for a way out. But Miriam wasn't done. She lowered her voice, making sure every word carried weight. "You have made a grave mistake, James. A very big mistake." James pressed his lips into a thin line. "Miss Carter, if you could just—" "Calm down," Miriam cut in, her voice as sharp as ice. "I am perfectly calm, James, but you already decided that I don't belong here. That was your choice, and now I will make sure the world knows about it." She cast a glance around the room, locking eyes with the other customers, all of whom had been silently observing. "Still unable to process my withdrawal?" James's face drained of color as the weight of her words hit him. Panic flickered in his eyes. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. It was too late. There was no room left for excuses. Miriam took a slow step back and retrieved her ID, which had been left lying on the counter. She flipped it over deliberately, ensuring the name printed on it was unmistakable. "Allow me to formally introduce myself, James," she said smoothly, her voice slicing through the silence. She tapped her ID against the counter. "Do you see this? This isn't just any customer's ID. This belongs to the founder and CEO of Carter Financial." The realization struck James like a freight train. The room fell into an eerie silence. Miriam didn't miss the way the security guard straightened his posture, the way Olivia's face lost all color, or how the other customers shifted uneasily. James's lips parted, but he was speechless. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for Miriam's ID, but he no longer had control of the situation. Miriam had reclaimed it, and he wasn't prepared for what came next. "I built this bank from nothing," Miriam continued, her tone unwavering. "I approved the budget that funded your position, James, and today I walked in as any other customer, but you treated me as if I didn't belong. You disrespected me, dismissed me, and now you have a decision to make. Either process my transaction or face the consequences. James's mouth opened again, but still no words came. He was scrambling, grasping for a way to fix this, but it was far too late. "Your chance has passed," Miriam said, her voice calm yet final. "Now you will explain this to corporate." She turned her attention to the security guard. "As for you," she continued, her voice growing even colder, "when a customer is not causing a disruption, intimidation should never be the first response. Be more cautious about whose instructions you blindly follow." The guard gave a small, uncomfortable nod. He had already realized his mistake. There was no going back now. Finally, Miriam turned to Olivia, who had remained silent through the ordeal. "And you," Miriam said, her tone softer but no less commanding, "you saw my ID, you saw my account number, yet you still dismissed me." Olivia's cheeks flushed. She stammered, "I was only following protocol, ma'am." Miriam stepped slightly closer, her voice turning sharper. "Protocol that seems to apply only to people like me." Olivia's mouth opened as if to respond, but she quickly averted her eyes to her register. Her hands trembled slightly as she fumbled with the keys. Miriam took a slow, measured breath, letting her words linger in the air. The tension in the room was suffocating, but she had said what needed to be said. Without another word, she turned on her heel and strode toward the exit, her heels striking the polished tile with purpose. The silence in the bank was absolute. As Miriam stepped through the doors, she knew things would never be the same again. The fallout came swiftly. By the next morning, Miriam had called an emergency meeting with her executive team. Every branch manager was required to attend an urgent review of customer service procedures. James was terminated. Mandatory bias training was enforced across all locations, along with a new system of accountability. Carter Financial saw immediate changes. Employees became acutely aware of their actions, and customers noticed the difference. But for Miriam, this was never about simply updating policies. It was about real, lasting transformation. She never forgot that day. It was a stark reminder that real change isn't dictated by words on paper. It happens when someone refuses to accept what is wrong and demands what is right. And Miriam Carter was exactly the person to make it happen.